get started on this episode of the Talkin Solutions Podcast, and we're talking about Calibre Biometrics and measuring metabolism analysis through your breath. It's a fantastic solution, and we're sitting with the founder next to me today, Mr. Udi Meirav. And Udi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with me today. Very, very excited to kind of learn about, number one, this technology, number two, your product, and how this can benefit and better people's lives.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be on your show, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. And Udi, if you could just kind of explain exactly what Calibre Biometrics does and what product that you have to offer, and just kind of get people to understand what you got going on right off the gate here.
Absolutely. So Calibre has developed a breath tracking device, which, for lack of something better to compare to, it looks like a mask. Okay, it covers your mouth and a small part of your nose, and it measures your breath on a continuous basis. And from that breath, it can extract a lot of really interesting information, not just about your pulmonary system, but about your entire metabolism of your body. And we'll talk more about the specifics. But that's the big idea. And this thing, you can wear it anywhere, anytime you like to get that information, whether you're working out or walking in the park or asleep in bed. It works in all these situations.
Amazing. And you got to tell me, Udi, where'd you get this kind of idea? Where did you decide to say, you know what, I'm going to create this kind of mass product. I'm going to get this app out with it, and I'm going to allow the consumer to have this at an affordable price. You know, tell me a little bit about your background and what kind of led you to create Calibre Biometrics.
Yeah, so it was not an obvious thing for me to end up doing this type of product. You know, my early background, I was trained as a physicist. I have a PhD in physics from MIT, and I thought I'd be doing that for my life, but it actually just opened my mind to a large set of possibilities. And I became essentially what you might call a serial entrepreneur. My previous company, which I started quite a while back, was dealing with air quality and measuring air quality in buildings. And that gave me a lot of exposure, and not just to the issues around what's in the air, but also the technologies of how to measure air. And that company is doing well and still chugging along. But at one point, I was thinking, well, you know, wouldn't it be cool if people who wear masks, as I saw people do in my trips to Asia, could have sensors on these masks that would be able to measure their breath in full glory. And from that, of course, they can get all these interesting biometric quantities. And I didn't know a whole lot about metabolism and breath-based biometrics at the beginning. So I started reading about it and looking into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized, A, that it's a really interesting area, and B, there's really not much in terms of products that can be offered at the consumer basis. Yes, there's professional products used by doctors and sports medicine professionals, but nothing really that can be available to the consumers. And I believe that, and I certainly believe it now, that I can develop something that could do that.
Yeah, awesome. And just a little bit, just for more people to kind of understand what exactly, because I'm sure some people who might not be aware of the space or anything like that are thinking like, what do you mean measure something out of your breath? And obviously we'll get that into the solution as well. But talk about just a little bit about the tangible metrics that you are kind of giving information on and things of that nature that the standard person will be utilizing, for example, when they are working out or they are sleeping or things of that nature.
So yeah, the first thing, which I think is the most striking, and I would admit that even though now I'm, quite immersed in this world, a few years ago, I did not really know this, and probably same is true of many people, is that all of your metabolism is essentially reflected in your breath. And you can think about it in very simple terms in the following way. Your body needs energy to do everything. And the way your body gets energy is one process, basically, which is you have a fuel, which is in your body from your food, which is either a sugar or a fat molecule. And you pull in oxygen from the air through your lungs. The oxygen breaks down that fuel, produces energy, and releases carbon dioxide. This is the basis, basically, for all animal life. We pull in oxygen, we burn a fuel, and we let go of CO2. So this fundamental fact is the real foundation of why breath has all this interesting information about your body's metabolism, because all of it requires oxygen and releases CO2. So if you measure the amount of oxygen coming in and the amount of CO2 going out, you get a full report card, like minute by minute, of what's going on in your body in terms of metabolizing sugars and fats for energy. So that's the basic issue here. Now, to measure that, you want to measure the quantity of air coming into your lungs and the quantity going out, and also be able to distinguish how much of the air going out is actually oxygen, how much of it is CO2, and so forth. So by measuring both the volume of the air coming in and out at any moment, as well as the concentration of oxygen and CO2 in that air, you can very quickly, draw from that. Okay, what's going on there? What is your body burning? How much is it burning? And how that relates to the various external influences that you're interested in tracking and controlling.
Exactly. And what that's burning is really measured in calories, correct? You're able to kind of get a little bit more accurate analysis of the amount of calories that you're kind of spending.
That's right. And the interesting thing about calories is a concept that's familiar to most people, frankly, and it's very even intuitive, I would say. But all these calories are really produced only by oxygen burning fuels. And that part, that link is something that I think a lot of people are not aware of. And the reason people are not aware of that is primarily because they've not had any tool that could even remotely tell them what are those quantities of oxygen and CO2. So if you basically ignore that, then you just think about calories as its own entity. But really, the only way to determine how many calories your body's burning and which kind, like fat versus carbs, is through the analysis of your breath. And this is not new. I mean, doctors have known this literally for more than a century. But because it's so hard to do in practice, most people have no awareness of that. But that's what we're going to change.
Right, exactly. That's the solution you can provide. Something that's more at a consumer level, affordable price that, they don't need to spend thousands and thousands on, and they can kind of get that real-time data and analysis. And, you mentioned something as well that really stands out to me is calories. I think if you talk to anybody who's kind of relatively focused in on their health and well-being, they're measuring their calories. They're measuring how much they're taking in, and they're doing their best to try to measure how much they're kind of spending, right? They're using, you jump on a treadmill and it kind of gives you a guesstimate of calories that you might be based on your height, weight, and the amount of time that you're running and your speed metrics and all of that. But what I think is really cool about what you're doing as well, or with your mask and your solution, is that you're allowing it to really get your own personalized kind of calories and really seeing, okay, this is fat energy, this is the sugar energy. Because I think the problem with treadmills, and I don't know if problem's the right word, but the reason why they're not so specific is it's kind of based on this algorithm. It's a best guesstimate, but there are a lot more factors that go into the way and how efficient your body works than just, for example, your height, weight, and speed that you're going. I mean, is that kind of a correct statement to make, or am I off a little bit?
Absolutely true. Yes, and it's a funny thing when you learn in physics in high school or maybe in college, and you try to do some calculation. They teach you what a calorie is and how it relates to force and motion. And you try to figure out how many calories does it take, say, to climb up to the top of the Empire State Building or to do something. It's a tiny, tiny number. It's depressingly small compared to what the body actually needs to burn. And the reason for that is because most of the energy the body produces is to keep the system going. It's thermal energy, it's chemical energy. Very little of that energy is actual mechanical energy. So when all you do is measure mechanical stuff, like the motion of a treadmill or a Stairmaster or a bicycle, you're capturing a tiny fraction of the true energy that's being put to work, if you will. And that means that your ability to correctly quantify that energy is very limited. And as of course, as you know, the bicycle or the treadmill that has some program there that counts the steps. Yeah, they have an algorithm that you can multiply it by your body weight and maybe a few other things. But it's really just a very coarse estimate. On the other hand, if you look at measuring air, it is the exact chemical quantity of energy that is being generated by your body, the exact amount of fuel that's being burned. It's interesting that the device that we built does not ask you what your body weight is. It doesn't need to know that. It doesn't care. honestly, it doesn't even need to know that you're human. I mean, there's just a chemical energy that's captured in a molecule of sugar. And if you burn it, that's how much energy is produced. Some of that energy will go into the motion of your legs or your arms. Most of it is probably just going to go into heat or into some other chemical process. But that is the total energy that you're utilizing. And that's really the quantity that you're trying to get at. So this is why measuring breath is really the only way to do that. And the Calibre, like any breath measurement device, doesn't need to know if you're running or on a treadmill or on a bike or if you're walking or lying down. It just counts the molecules of oxygen and CO2, and that's your answer. Don't care how big you are, what you're doing, just the number of oxygen and CO2 molecules. That's the answer.
Right. Breaks it down just exactly to what it is, right? As simple as it is, it's your intake in and your input in, and then your what you're outputting out. And it just.
One of the reasons that's so interesting is because let's say you get on a treadmill and you run for half an hour or so, and then you get off the treadmill. Well, it turns out that a lot of the energy that you're burning from this treadmill workout doesn't happen on the treadmill. It happens after you get off the treadmill. And you know that you're breathing hard, right? Why are you breathing hard after you've had a workout? It's because your body's catching up, if you will, on its energy deficit. So it's still pulling in more oxygen than it does at rest, and it's producing more CO2. And none of that is measured on the treadmill, of course, because you're not on the treadmill anymore. But if you measure your breath, you see that. And not only do you see the total, you can see how it slowly kind of settles down as your breath calms down and your calorie burn slowly goes down. But it is slowly. It's not right away. And the only way to keep track of that is to measure your breath. And
right. Yeah.
And insight here, again, not a new insight. And I don't want to claim any credit whatsoever for this thing. Only that we want to make this thing easy and available to everybody.
And that leads me to my next question on that front. I mean, obviously, you're taking this solution and you're putting it into a much more attainable way for consumers. So what has been the problem with being able to get this type of technology out to a regular consumer's hands in the past? You know, what have been some of the challenges and issues that, companies or people, maybe they just haven't tried or anything of that nature to turn this product into something that's a little bit more consumer friendly?
It really is a tough problem. It was a tough problem. It still is a tough problem, I should say. But, the reason is because measuring air is much more tricky and is much less, it doesn't lend itself as easily to the miniature sensor that you can put on a little wristwatch or on a ring and put it on and it touches your skin. And those things are amazing, but they can measure electrical signals or optical signals off your skin. And they're very, very good. And when it comes to measuring air, there is no comparable miniaturization. It's still, you need to intercept the airflow and capture it, and measure the speed of the airflow. And then you also need to analyze the composition of the air. So it's a bunch of things that you got to do. And it's especially measuring the flow, which seems like a very simple thing. I mean, what could be more simple than measuring the flow of air? It's not as intellectually challenging as trying to measure optical signals or electrical signals or magnetic signals. But the problem with measuring air is you have to measure a velocity of airflow, if you will. And air tends to go everywhere. So it's not enough to measure the velocity of air. Well, you have to capture all the air that's coming out of your lungs or your mouth and measure the velocity at every different place to see how much air is going here and how much air is going there. And that's, of course, a hopeless task. So what people do typically is they make you breathe all your air into a tube. So all the air is going through this tube. And then in the tube, it's a little bit easier to measure the airflow. And that's fine, except now you have to walk around the tube, sticking out of your mouth. And that's no fun. So it's not a very glamorous problem, but it's a very practical issue. So that was the real biggest challenge here, is how to reduce the size of a mechanical device that simply manages to corral your air and measure its flow. And that was the biggest challenge that from my perspective, to figure out how to do that without tubes hanging out. The other part, of course, is getting sensors that measure oxygen and CO2. And on that front, traditionally, there's been very good sensors for a long time, but they've been big and bulky. But there's been a trend of miniaturization of these sensors, which I've had a front row seat to that for a long time because I worked in the air business, and I was able to anticipate that there's going to be sensors that are really small enough and good enough to do this in that super light, super small form factor. And by the way, it's not just about size and weight. It's also about power consumption. There's some really good air sensors that just need a lot of battery power. And now you need to carry a big battery, so that's no good. And so it's all these things have to come together to make something which is small. But so again, no one thing here which is overwhelming, but I did not see that anybody steps up to the plate and tries to solve the airflow measurement problem in this super compact way and connect all the other dots and come up with something which you can just offer consumers. Here you go. You want this? It's ready for you, and you can use it anytime. So,
right. I mean,
just do it and make it happen.
Just do it and make it happen. Right. I mean, convenience is always going to be at the top of the consumer's mind, right? So if you're walking around with a tube, I mean, now you're talking about like a fashion thing, and and now you just have a mask, and then the mask obviously is not meant to be worn every single time you go out and work out. I mean, you can obviously, but it's up to the person, but you can still go out and get all these tangible metrics, without having to wear this mask every time you run and every time you lift or sleep or all that stuff.
Some people are really interested in understanding their calorie burn. It's an area of enormous focus, and so they might at least once in a while wear it for a very long duration, like a whole day, maybe, or at least many hours, and they get kind of a profile of what their calorie burn looks like during the day. I mean, how many calories do you burn when you're sitting at your desk? I mean, how many do you burn when you're driving to work or watching TV? And those, because the reality is that if you look at your total calorie burn in a day, most of it is not from your workout; it's from everything else that goes on the rest of the time. So it's nice to see that, but I agree with you. I don't think many people are going to be interested in having that thing on their face many hours every day. There might be a few, but most people will want it only more as an occasional device for these longer stretches, and maybe more routinely for workouts or critical activities like that.
Exactly. And before we kind of get into how beneficial this can be for people in ways that this can actually enhance their lives and why knowing this information can be so important on that front as well, I'd be curious to hear, you mentioned this type of understanding has been around for a century or so, just understanding how the body works and stuff like that. And what has kind of been the evolution and whatnot in terms of getting accurate analysis from the breath, like for somebody, I guess, that may not be a physicist like yourself or anything in that nature as well. How do you understand that this is going to give you the accurate results that you're looking for? Obviously, it's with the breath, but just how exactly does it kind of work? If you can kind of break that down in simple terms for us on that front.
Well, so the technical term for measuring your calories from your breath, and by the way, let me just kind of open parentheses here. Measuring calories is one thing you can get from your breath, but there's many other quantities that are just as interesting and are not at all related to calories. We can talk about them as well. But the idea of measuring your energy burn or your calories from breath is called calorimetry, and sometimes this is called indirect calorimetry, a term that I don't like, but I can explain why it got that name. It's indirect because there's a thing called direct calorimetry, and that is, you literally put the person in this insulated chamber, like they're in a closed-off chamber, and you watch. And because it's very well insulated, once a person is in there, if they're generating energy, it shows up as an increase in the temperature of the air inside that room, just like that. So direct calorimetry became a term for measuring your calorie burn or your energy use by watching the temperature inside this closed chamber that they put you in, which is a pretty awful experience to be in that thing, but it's very clear type of measurement. So, and later they started finding out and proving that if you just measure your composition of air, like the oxygen, CO2, and whatnot, then you can get an indirect read on your energy burn, which is virtually as accurate, if done correctly, as the direct calorimetry. It's not exactly the same, but they're very close. And this has been done for a long time. Now, the reason I don't like indirect calorimetry, because that is actually the direct way we measure energy today. Nobody goes into these sealed chambers, but a lot of people get indirect calorie burn from looking at their treadmill or their wristwatch or things like that. So that's really the indirect way to do this, and the direct way is to measure your breath. So for that reason, I don't like using the term indirect calorimetry, and I would rather use the term breath-based calorimetry or breath calorimetry. But that's kind of a snapshot on this history. It goes back a long time, and if you Google it, you can see pictures from ages ago. Grainy black and white pictures showing how people did calorimetry in the early days of this field, probably more than a century ago.
That's so interesting to me. But it makes loads of sense how that would be a much more accurate analysis than what you're, had just described through the word you didn't like, in terms of having to measure with the treadmills and things like that and have it be indirect and all that. It makes a lot of sense on that front. So that's really fascinating.
Some of the purists will say, well, why do you call this breath calorimetry? Why do you call this what everybody else calls it, indirect calorimetry? Because I think because here's the thing. We are trying to open this whole field to the broader public. As long as you're just dealing with a bunch of, scientists who are doing this research in a lab, they tend to like fairly abstract terms or terms that don't sound very clear or intuitive to the broader set of potential users. Part of trying to open up this breath-based insight, breath-based biometrics to the broader public is to use terminology that makes sense and that people are going to be more likely to be able to relate to and understand. And so in addition to developing a product and developing the software and all these things, we're trying to also develop language that will be useful for the people we're trying to serve with this type of product.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to simplify it down, right? And make it really easy to digest and understand and things of that nature as well on that front. So it's obviously another challenge. What other awesome things can you kind of measure and get metrics on outside of calorie burn that you were kind of alluding to?
So yeah, I think there's many things here that are not even necessarily fully or well understood, but one that is quite well understood and very popular is your oxygen consumption. Many athletes know the term VO2 or VO2 max. So when you say just a few words, what is VO2 and what is VO2 max? And they're not the same thing. VO2 is essentially how much oxygen your body is using per minute right now. So it's like at any point in time, there's a VO2 that represents how much oxygen your body is burning or using in its process. Now, to get that, there's a lot of oxygen in the air, so we pull that into our lungs. And when we exhale, there's still a lot of oxygen in the air. Our body doesn't harvest all that oxygen. It only uses about a quarter of the oxygen that's available in the air in the lungs, and the remaining 3/4 actually gets exhaled. But if you net out the amount of oxygen coming in and out, then see what the average rate for a minute, that's called VO2. And VO2 basically is, if you think about a car, when you got your foot on the gas pedal, this is your gas pedal. Okay, this is how far your gas pedal is for your body. That's your VO2. And your VO2 max is when you floor it. And that's the maximum amount of oxygen your body is able to consume. And it's interesting that there is a very clear limit on that. And if you try to work harder, like let's say you're running about as fast as your body can supply oxygen, and you try to pick it up even further, you can. But you cannot supply the oxygen needed to do any more than what is your VO2 max. So what your body does then is switches over to temporary resources that cannot be sustained for a long time, but for a few seconds or even a few minutes, you can do something that does not require the oxygen right now, and you can get the oxygen later. So that's called anaerobic exercise. Okay, so when you go into an anaerobic exercise, by definition, your lungs are not supplying all the oxygen that's required at that time for whatever activities you're doing. And your body has mechanisms to borrow energy chemically from some resources, but up to a point. Beyond that, it will run out of these resources and you'll just collapse. So anyway, all that to say that athletes, when they want to gauge how good their physical conditioning is. They are mostly focused on what is their VO2 max, what is the maximum amount of sustainable energy that your body can produce. And that is something that is tracked by athletes when they try to improve their performance. The problem is that measuring it is very difficult. How do you measure your VO2 max? The only way available to do that right now is to wear one of these very cumbersome, clunky, expensive breath measuring devices. Typically, you do that on a treadmill or on a bike in a laboratory where there's a physician or a technician supervising you. And then if you work harder and harder and harder until they find you plateau, you can't generate any more energy. And say, okay, that's your VO2 max. Now, if your VO2 max is, say it's 3 liters a minute, and you work out really hard for a year, you come back a year later, your VO2 max is now going up to 4 liters a minute. Okay, that's improving your physical conditioning. So physical conditioning is in large part characterized by your maximum ability to process oxygen, your VO2 max. That is something that you can measure if you measure your breath. So there's an example there. I can give you another example, which I find extremely interesting. And there is growing interest, I think, in that in non-athletic circles, which is, what is the right amount of breathing for a person? I mean, how much air should a person breathe? And you think, well, more is better. You would think that. But it turns out that it's not necessarily true that breathing more is better. In some sense, it's almost the opposite. The less you breathe, the better it is for your body, for reasons which are partially understood, but perhaps not entirely. And people who have dug into this have revealed that, actually, there's a long history here. And anybody who's done yoga or martial arts knows that there's a lot of focus on very calm and minimalistic breathing. It turns out that there's good reasons for that. And I don't know that they're necessarily all understood, but one example is if you breathe a lot, CO2 gets released from your lungs. Where's that CO2 coming from? It's coming from your blood. Now, your blood stores a lot of CO2, a lot more than is generated, a lot more than the oxygen that comes in and out. So it really wants that CO2 there in some sense. And if you breathe too much, you lose more CO2 than you should. And that starts messing up the pH balance, the chemical balance of your blood. So that's not a good thing, okay? So maybe you want to keep track of what is the concentration of CO2 in your breath. Because if you're breathing too much, you're depleting your CO2 in your blood more than required. And the result of that will be that the CO2 concentration in your exhale breath also comes down. And that is probably an indication that you are breathing too much. So it's a bit of a mind explosion. What do you mean breathing too much? How can you possibly breathe too much? Well, it turns out you can breathe too much. And the signature for that would be there's a decreasing concentration of CO2 in your exhale breath. And how would you know that? It's very hard to know that without a device that tells you that.
Exactly. And I had a couple of those mind-blowing moments during your explanation of the two. I could think of examples on both where, you are working on, what was it, the VO2 max? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yep, your VO2 max. I can think of a few times in my training days, I'm by no means an athlete or anything, but, I can think of a few times where I pushed myself too fast. And the next thing I know, I'm like seeing darkness and I'm kind of passing out a little bit. I'm like, what happened? And then you mentioned the martial arts. I have some boxing experience. It's your breath needs to be very measured. Otherwise, you're going to get off balance and everything's going to get kind of ruined there. So that really was kind of a mind explosion moment for me right there. Udi, I want to move forward a little bit and talk about why and how knowing all these things can help empower people and help empower athletes and help people just kind of better understand their bodies and, better understand ways that they can kind of move forward with their lives and take full advantage and control of their health. One thing that I've noticed, and I'm sure you have within the last couple of decades, with this technology and with everything that's been developed and things like that, people are now getting more and more attuned to how their bodies work. They want to be able to understand how their bodies work, correct? I mean, that goes with diet, that goes with working out, goes with the nutrition density of foods and what's in them. And now you're kind of allowing a consumer who probably is working out on a regular basis, but they don't have access to the lab you were talking about. I mean, I've seen videos of athletes getting set up and measuring that. They don't got access to that, not a consumer, but you're providing the solution as well. So, I mean, I think that this is going to be a fantastic way for people to kind of take control of their health a little bit as well, because understanding this data can really help them maximize their performance and their ability to improve their bodies.
Yeah, no, I one of my favorite quotes, and it's a very well-known quote, although it's disputed who it's attributed to originally, is that you can only improve what you can measure. And that's kind of a key insight here. We're not my company. We're a small company, and I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert in human breath. I think we're very good at developing devices that do great measurements, but the rest. There's a very large and very sophisticated community of people who we want to give this to as a tool. And for them to come back with a lot of the answers that we don't claim to have, we're just coming to the party with, look, if it's true that you can't improve what you can't measure, well, guess what? We can help you measure things. And how to improve them could be any number of things. I mean, for example, if you want to improve your health and you want to see what things influence your metabolism. For example, how well you slept the night before, what the weather is like. I mean, if you go for the same run on 2 days with slightly different weather, do you have any idea, how that affects your metabolism? You don't. And guess what? Your bicycle doesn't, or your FitBit or whatever device you're using those do not know that, because they will measure the exact same motion that you had on any weather, and I don't know if weather is necessarily a huge influence, but I'm just throwing that as an example. Or whether you had, eggs or oatmeal for breakfast, is that going to affect, your energy burn, as well as, the composition of your fuel of choice? We didn't get a lot into this yet, the ability to distinguish between burning fat and burning carbs. We probably should talk about that, but how those are influenced by choices you make. Even what clothes you wear. If you're wearing warmer clothes, does that change your energy burn? I mean, if you take a dip into ice water, does your body have to produce more energy to warm itself up? Probably. Would it be nice to be able to measure that and see that? This is the kind of tool that can give you the ability to start understanding better the influences that affect your metabolism and your breath and your energy and your oxygen and your CO2 and so forth. So the hope here, and the dream, if you will, is that put this in the hands of thousands, millions of people, and we're going to get a lot of new learnings and insights from that. And I don't know what those are going to be, but it would be super cool to watch it happen.
Oh, yeah, it would be fantastic. I mean, it's really empowering the individual to take advantage of their health and wellness. I mean, we get a lot of information about food these days. When it comes to exercise, oh, man, there are so many different ways and people telling you how to do stuff. I mean, same thing with diets, I suppose, as well. But why not actually just understand how your body works, how it's in tune? You hit the nail on the head with the difference in breakfast for oatmeal and eggs. I have a theory for myself. Let's just use myself as an example. I work out pretty regularly. I do a lot of HIIT training. So a lot of high intensity interval training. For those that don't know, that's like 1 minute of really intense running, 2-3 minutes, whatever it might be. And then you kind of have like a 30 seconds where you kind of go down and lower the heart rate a bit and then raise that heart rate back up again. So what I've noticed is if I have eggs or anything that's more high fat and less carbs before a workout, I don't perform nearly as well. I don't know if I don't have any real evidence of that. That's just how I'm feeling versus if I have oatmeal or like, flapjacks or things of that nature as well. I feel much more energized and things of that nature. And this tool allows you to do that as well. And I want to ask you specifically what you mentioned before. Obviously, something that's big when it comes to training and working out is fat loss. Yeah. That is something that millions upon billions people probably across the planet are working and would like to try and get better on. You're telling that you can actually measure if you're burning off, say, a sugar molecule in like carbs, or if you're actually burning off kind of fat as well. And this tool can kind of help you distinguish between that, correct?
That's exactly right. And the reason for that is actually not hard to understand. You don't have to get into the chemical detail, but there is a difference in the chemistry of sugars and fats in terms of the amount of carbon in each molecule and the amount of oxygen. They're both made of three atoms, which is carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen in different ratios. And that's the difference between fats and sugars. It's one of the differences. So, but the upshot of that is when you metabolize them, and the end product is always the same, which is it's going to break down into water, carbon dioxide, and energy. Those are the end products of breaking down fats or breaking down sugars in your body. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is because of the difference in the initial chemistry of these molecules, you will end up with a different number of CO2 molecules for a given number of oxygen molecules it consumes. And to make it less abstract, when you burn sugar, there's one CO2 molecule for every oxygen molecule coming in. It's a one-to-one exchange. Super simple. When you're burning fat, it's not one-to-one. It's really 0.7 molecules of CO2 for every one molecule of oxygen. So with 100 molecules of oxygen, you'll get 70 molecules of CO2. It's a very different number than if you were burning sugar. And for that reason, if you are able to accurately measure the oxygen coming in and the CO2 going out, by looking at the ratio of those two things, you can actually determine whether it's all sugar burning or all fat burning, or what's most likely is some mix of the two. And exactly what is that mix? So whatever that ratio you get, you can draw from that what is the fuel mix that your body is using at that point in time. So it's very cool, very interesting, somewhat surprising, but makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, my favorite part about this is just how customized it is and how personalized it is. I mean, I think, and I'm going off base here in the sense that, I just personally think with all of these diets out there and all of these exercise programs out there and all of the marketing that's tied to that, 21 days and I guarantee you'll lose 5 pounds of fat, whatever it might be, or, do this keto diet for 28 days, whatever it might be. The issue for me is that I always come down to the point that not everybody's body is the same. Not everybody's body functions the same. We're all different. I mean, we're made up of a lot of the same things, obviously, but, somebody that weighs 165 pounds, is 6'1" or whatever, and I don't know, runs 10 miles an hour. That doesn't mean each body is going to burn the exact same calorie, right? Or the exact same stuff. There's going to be a difference. So what I really like about this is you're kind of really empowering the consumer to avoid falling into these traps where they might spend unnecessary money on stuff when they could really just be kind of understanding their body and doing the testing and getting more accurate results.
That's exactly right. It's one of the reasons why it's so tricky to try to use these, what I would call mechanical methods of measuring your calorie burn, whether it's the step counter or, the bike measures the number of turns of the pedals. They don't have the ability to look into those differences. And what may be no less important is that, look, your body can burn sugar or fat at any point in time and later kind of reshuffle the board. You can burn a lot of sugar now and later use fat to replenish your sugar, or you can take extra sugar that you have and turn it into fat. So your body has that ability to switch things around. And for that reason, you got to look at the bigger picture, and not just at what's happening right now. But the starting point is knowing what's going on, right now in your body, and that's something that can only be done by keeping track of that. It's almost like like a bookkeeping. How much oxygen is going in, how much CO2 is going out. And the longer the period of time that you capture this over, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour or 3 hours, the more likely you are to get an answer that represents the real balance in terms of your body. If you get very high carb burn, for a short period of time, but on your treadmill, but the rest of the time your body's using fat to replenish its stored energy, then that's good. That's a good thing, even though you weren't actually burning fat on the treadmill. So those are the kinds of things that you cannot get unless you're keeping track of these things through your breath.
Right. And it just gives you so much to empower yourself from a fitness perspective, from a nutritional perspective, and how your body reacts to certain types of foods when you burn them off and things of that nature as well. I really love that. Can you tell that I really want one myself at this point? But what I want to talk about a little bit too, which I also think is just as important, we've talked a lot about understanding, from a fitness perspective, right? Like working out. But another thing that we had talked about prior is, you can measure how your body works while you sleep. And obviously sleep is an incredibly important part of, recovery, just functioning better. I mean, there are so many studies out there that, your work is going to take a drastic reduction in productivity if you don't get a good amount of sleep the night before, right? From an athlete's perspective, you're going to perform much worse than you would if you got 8 hours versus 4. Or whatever it might be. So tell me a little bit about how people can utilize this tool to kind of understand their sleep patterns and REM and output and input and kind of on that sense.
So first, I completely second what you said here in terms of sleep being like this amazing new, it's not new, I mean, I should never say new, but it's an amazing frontier. And there's a lot of new discoveries and new insights that are happening on a daily basis right now. It's amazing. And and the more we study it, the more we realize how critical it is for our health and our performance long-term, as well as near-term and everything. So the other thing that's really interesting is that we use a lot of energy when we sleep, and you know how we know that? Because we breathe a lot. Anybody who's ever seen somebody sleep, the breath gets, systematic, but it doesn't, you don't breathe like a tiny amount of air relative to what you would be breathing when you're awake. Sometimes you even breathe more in your sleep than you're just sitting there, at your desk. So why is that? I mean, that has got to be energy use. So, and probably a lot of that energy is going to your brain because, and the brain, by the way, is a huge energy hog. It's for good reason, but it's just one more reason to need a device that measures the energy use of your body, including the brain. None of the brain's energy use can be captured in a pedal or even in a wrist-based device. So now, if you look into what's going on in sleep, to me, that's a fascinating space that we're hoping that our device is going to be used in the hands of experts that are doing sleep studies. And one of the things you can do with this, which is basically never possible until now, is to give it to people to use at home when they sleep. I mean, there's a thing called a sleep lab. And even in a sleep lab, typically you don't measure the oxygen and CO2 all night long. You certainly don't do that at home. And allowing people to do that and start collecting data, in large quantities for many people, I think is going to be a huge new phase of our ability to understand sleep. And exactly as you were saying, we know that sleep has these different phases and they're very different. There's REM and non-REM, and the non-REM sleep has a couple of different, phases. And they're all quite different, and they all have a special role. How does that relate to your metabolic energy use during sleep? Those are things, and again, we're not the research institute that's going to teach the world what's going on in sleep. We're the company that's going to give this tool, that's going to make it easy for those research institutes to give it to lots of people, hundreds, thousands, maybe more. And hey, wear this at night while you sleep. It's much easier to wear this thing than many other things that people have to put on at night, for various reasons. It doesn't have any wires, it doesn't have any tubes. Its battery will last all night long, no problem. And the data will be there waiting for you on your phone or on your cloud in the morning. So I hope it's going to unleash a lot of novel studies and better insight into what's going on when we sleep.
Yeah, and I think the product timing is excellent. I think it's one of those things where, like we've talked about a little bit earlier, people are getting more and more confident. They're getting more interested in understanding how their body works to maximize their health and to maximize their well-being and their production, their moods. That's another thing. People forget that foods and working out really can affect your mood, your anxiety, all these things, which, you are providing the tool, like you said, to allow them to kind of do their research and to understand how it kind of best equips them as well. But I'd love to ask you, just because you're an accomplished person, an accomplished entrepreneur and things of that nature as well, how would you say your entrepreneurial experience and your other ventures and your other endeavors and things of that nature equipped you to kind of build out and work on this company now and on this product?
That's actually a very big, loaded question. I mean, and I'm not even sure that I necessarily was fully well prepared for this venture when I got started. So I don't want to claim that. But I can say that when you try to build a company from the ground up, there's all these different things you got to think of, and there's all these different things you got to do, and you have a very limited resource. You have a very small team, if any team, and and for the first couple of years, I was essentially doing this on my own, kind of in my literal basement, not just my proverbial basement. But you have to think about all the different things and constantly try to figure out what's important to do now, as opposed to this can wait till later. And the ability to organize that, I think, is critical. But let me tell you what I've tried to do that I don't think my experience has prepared me for. Because that actually, to me, is more interesting in some sense. This is there's two challenges here with this product. Other than technical, measure airflow, that's great. I know how to figure those things out, and I think we did. But there's two other things which are quite difficult. One of them is there is a challenge of educating a broad market what this is and why this is useful and why you would even be bothered to look at this and want to have one of these things and to what purpose. And I think the answers are good, but the educational challenge here, or the communication challenge, is enormous. And even a very large company with a lot of resources to communicate to the public would be facing a steep uphill climb to try to get the word out, if you will, that this is important, this is new, this is interesting. So that's one thing. The other thing is, it's despite the technical beauty of this thing, it's a very intimate thing to put something on your face. So you have to put yourself in the mind of the user and see, what do we need to do with this product to minimize the aspects that would want you to not put it on your face, so to speak. You want it to be comfortable. You want it to be less obtrusive. You want it to look as nice as it could. All these things. And I did not have a lot of expertise or experience in creating things that people are going to love to put on their face. So that was, to me, those two things are challenges that nothing in my past prepared me for that, and I had to think through those things. As a user and as a consumer, not as an entrepreneur or as an executive with technical expertise. So that's it, and I still think it is a challenge. I mean, the product right now is the best we could do so far. But at this point, we have already in mass production. I already have many ideas about how I need to make it better and how I could make it better, and I will make it better in the next round and one after that. So this one. It's pretty awesome, but I'd be first in line to list you all the limitations or the things that need to become better, and that we have to do that, and we will do that. And it's gonna be a very interesting ride, hopefully not too bumpy, and we're going to make these things better and more comfortable and more useful, and maybe even look cooler over time, and that's the plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Those are a lot of challenges, right? I mean, a lot of this is probably going to be based on the feedback you get, right? Like, what are the customers and users of this mask and the app itself, and getting that information? What are they going to be saying, and really kind of understanding that feedback and applying it into future iterations, as you move forward, because you're right. I mean, that is one of those things where, you got to put it on your face. You got to put a mask on. Unfortunately, people are probably a little tired of putting masks on at this point, but or maybe they're used to it, but
need to minimize the things that they really hate about masks, So, but there's no magic here. I mean, I think we're not naturally inclined to put things like that to cover our mouth. I will say this: and this was a technical issue. We wanted to make sure that at least it doesn't introduce any impedance to your breath. And there's a reason why breath measurement devices always impede your breath, because if you're not creating any resistance, it's very hard to measure the flow. But we took it very far down the path of, we'll make the resistance almost zero. And unless you're breathing really, really hard, you actually cannot tell that there's any resistance to your breath. And we've tried this. I mean, there's holes in which you can breathe through, and if I triple the number of holes, you're not going to feel any difference because it's already so easy to breathe through this thing. But that is just one example. So there's comfort of the just physically having something that's touching your skin. The other one is just having nothing that impedes your breathing, because you do not want anything that's going to make it hard for you to breathe, especially if you're going to work out. I think we've accomplished that, at least to a large degree. But that's one of the key design issues that we wanted to make sure we do.
Yeah, and that's an important part, right? Because, these are the people you're going to be, selling to, are the people that want to put this mask on, right? Because they're going to want to get this data because they really want to understand their body and to best improve themselves and to best give themselves an opportunity to live a healthy life to the best that they possibly can. And that's what this tool kind of helps you do. So, I think creating that mask and making it the most important feature of not making it encumbersome if you start breathing heavily during a workout is the most important thing. So there's definitely that benefit that you've already kind of seemed to have figured out going forward on that front. So let's talk a little bit about how people can use this, download it, get it going, and then, obviously purchase it, get it shipped. Talk a little bit about the accompanying application that kind of works with it as well. We haven't talked too much about that. So, for example, we know how the breathing works, the analysis on that front, and then it gets sent over to the phone, or is it available on desktop as well? How can people kind of take a look and utilize these features?
Yes, this is one of the fastest moving areas of innovation, because changing the physical product is a slower and more involved process. But getting the software to work better is something that you can do at a very fast pace. So every few weeks you can put in another improvement, another tweak, another new feature, and that's going to be a very active aspect of this thing. So right now, there's an app, and you download it on your phone, and it can work on both Android phones as well as Apple iOS phones, and that's great. And these are very powerful computers. Systems that used to measure breath in the old days needed a computer to gather the data and display it. Well, guess what? Everybody has a computer in their pocket, which is 10 times more powerful than what is currently being used today in some of these laboratories. So that's great. So we don't have to give you a computer. We do have an app, and it works on your phone. And that app is really making improvements on a weekly basis. And so there's a version now that is already released, and people who have bought the device and received it can now download that app and immediately get to work. It's very, very easy. We erred on the side of making it super easy to just have this Bluetooth connection happen, and you're just off to the races within minutes of getting this thing out of the box. No setup, no nothing like that. There are many things that we don't do yet. For example, one of the things we get asked is, does the app give you advice? Do this, don't do that, and kind of interpret things. And right now, I would say that the app that we currently provide is very light on the teaching or advice giving aspect of the business. There's a lot of teaching in the sense there's a lot of frequently asked questions or explanations. What does this mean? What is that term? What is RER? What is VO2? What is minute volume? So a lot of that is explained in the app, which is nice because these are new concepts to a lot of our users. But it doesn't tell you need to, train more, or you need to eat less this or sleep more of that. We're not in the advice business yet with the app. Now, will we ever be in the advice business? I don't know. My general feeling is that we don't want to do things that we're not particularly good at, like giving health advice. There's a lot of people out there who are very good at this. We're going to give them the tool. And there may be variations on the app, one for people with a specific type of a challenge, or maybe who want to work on their marathon running, or people who have some lung ailment that they want to be able to keep track of. There could be very specific flavors, if you will, of the app that help in those situations. Right now, it's sort of a all-purpose, one-size-fits-all app that we just got it out there. The product just started shipping last week. So it's early days in terms of all that. But I would say this to our users and our potential users, hang on to your hats, because this is going to be a wild ride in terms of the rapidly evolving features and use cases of the app. The physical device, there will be improvements over time, but basically it is what it is. The fun which happens here is going to be where the wild ride happens for the most part. And yes, it's going to be available also as a desktop solution, with the cloud access and all that. The first version of the app actually doesn't do that, but we're literally weeks away from having that capability.
Awesome. Yeah, really utilize the platforms across that you can kind of work on and get this kind of real-time data. And yeah, you make a great point. I mean, it constantly is iterations, right? You're constantly trying to evolve that product. You just got to get that MVP, the minimal viable product out, just get it going so people can use it. And then you can always add and iterate, see what people want, get their feedback, and, do all the general product stuff as you will on that front. So how,
yeah, it's the little things that can really get you. If you can have everything right, the sensors and the design, all that, and then the software crashes, or the battery runs out of charge too fast, or this thing stops working, depending on the phase of the moon, and those are real things that happen all the time in products, and you can have the best product in the world 90% of the time or 95% of the time. Those 5% failures can really influence the experience for users. So that's really where a lot of the hard work.
Exactly. Right. It's all about, like you talked about earlier, it's all about putting your feet in the shoes of the user and really making it seamless, especially in today's product world where that's what it's all about. It's all about convenience. It's all about things working and eliminating things that break. So really interesting on that front. So how can people get one? How can they buy it?
I told my team this, you look at products made by big companies that have been out there for years, and I'm talking about multi-billion-dollar companies that have had years to perfect their software, and there's still weird stuff that happens, right? It crashes, it doesn't do what you want, it goes into this funny mode. And, so even companies with a lot of resources and a lot of time have a hard time perfecting software and product behavior. So, that's just the reality, and we have to do our best within what's possible.
Working on an application right now myself that's got bugs that keep popping up out of nowhere after I think they're solved. It's always the hardest 10%, that last 10%. How can people buy it? How can they go? Can they go to your website? Where can they get this and make a purchase if they'd like?
The answer is very simple because there's only one way to buy it, which is come to our website, which is calibrebio.com, one word. And I just like to remind people that Calibre is spelled with a B-R-E, not a B-E-R at the end. And on our website, you can just go and click buy. Or you can just go to the website and get a little more insight or education about how this works and what it does and why that's interesting. But that's basically the process, and we've had people who've ordered it for months ago and been patiently waiting because the product wasn't ready. And actually, last week was super exciting for us because we finally started shipping. So this is fun times now.
Congratulations. That's fantastic that you got to this point. Is it available across the country? Is it available globally? Where's the reach go?
Currently, we ship in U.S. and Canada. We hope to quickly, I don't want to commit to a timeline, but quickly start shipping in at least some additional countries, and over time more. So we won't hit the whole world all at once. But right now, U.S., Canada, yes. Soon, at least some subset of European countries, and more.
Got to hit the UK with the way that Calibre is spelled.
That's right. Canadians too, So never forget our Canadians.
Yeah, exactly.
So
awesome. And then on that front too, is there other ways that people can support? Do you have social media channels, LinkedIn, or anything of that nature as well that people can kind of jump on and learn more or support from?
We do. We have presence both on Facebook and Instagram, and we're trying to do a little bit more also in some other areas. It's just beginning to happen now. We erred on the side of walk before you talk kind of thing, so that we didn't want to be out there telling too many stories before we actually have some of this show. So we did a little bit of that, but really not much. And now that the product's getting out there, we're going to put more deliberate effort into communication. And yes, we have Facebook and Instagram, and there will be several other areas. We're going to be doing, videos, which are what we call tutorial videos, where one of my key colleagues, his name is Sean Coakley. He's phenomenal, and he knows so much about breath. He's a very well-known expert in breath as it relates to health and to athletics. And he'll be doing a whole series of tutorial videos that we're going to put online. He's also participating in a bunch of podcasts himself. So there's going to be a lot of that coming out. Not all at once, but we want to, gradually, advance, the communication part. As I said before, that's probably one of our biggest challenges is kind of teaching what this is and why it's cool. People might
Exactly. I think once you get that education out there, the solutions are pretty obvious once you know what they are. But yeah, you got to just move it, little by little, poco a poco, and kind of get things going on that front. But, Udi, what else, anything else that you would like to add on this episode of the podcast that maybe we didn't touch on or anything of that nature as well that you'd like people to know?
Well, there's a lot of areas where we can use this, that we didn't get into yet. And we're hoping to see that happen, whether it's team sports, whether it is research programs. One of the things we're really interested in is getting people who want to do research, whether it's high-grade academic research or just, more, pedestrian studies. We think this is one of the first things that people are going to want to do with this, is to use it as a tool for better understanding breath, for better understanding human physiology. So I'd like to just encourage people who have any interest in that is to reach out to us and work with us to help start doing this. Use this as a tool to better understand the human body.
Absolutely. I mean, I could think of several use cases for organizations off the top of my head, right? You get high level, university athletics, sports medicine, sleeping studies, as you mentioned earlier, just a way that people can measure sleep and things of that nature as well. There's so many areas that you can really work with organizations on that front, in addition to just the consumer and people like myself who just have a fascination with this type of stuff as well. So, Udi, thank you.
I want to say, and that's maybe a little bit of a caveat, obviously there's enormous variation in people's facial structure, and we would like to make different variations of this that will fit more comfortably for everybody to have the best fit they can. We only have one size right now. It's not because we don't think that more sizes would be better suited for the variation in our users. But that's something that takes a lot of capital to do and a lot of time. So it's on our to-do list. There will be more sizes coming out, not next week or next month, but over in the coming months and certainly the coming years, we will expand this. So even if it's a little bit too big or too small for your particular facial structure, have faith, have patience. We will work on additional sizes, and hopefully by the time we're done, there'll be a caliber that will fit anybody who wants.
Awesome. What's the price point?
So our list price on the website is $399.
Perfect. And that's it. Listening, early innings of the company. There are a lot of changes, innovations, features, and all of that good stuff coming to both of the mask, the wearable, and then, of course, obviously within the technology as well, as they continue to iterate the product and get your feedback and things of that nature as well. So I definitely encourage you all to go check out the website. Once again, that website is calibrebio.com. That's CALIBREBIO.com. You can also get their links on social media as well. And as always, we'll have that within our week on our Instagram account and within our website as well. So, Udi, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed this discussion that we had today. I think it was really useful and really great to kind of get a full understanding of how this tool can help empower and enhance individuals' lives as well as help equip research teams and things of that nature as well.
Well, thank you, Will. I really want to thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show and to get the word out, so to speak, to your listeners about this. So thank you for that. And it was also a pleasure talking.
Absolutely. Happy to do so, and excited to share this with all the listeners as well. And that's going to wrap up this edition of the Talkin Solutions, a podcast featuring the company Calibre Biometrics. They have a product that measures and analyzes your breath to give you actual real-time insights into your metabolic rate, for example, your calories, all things of that nature as well. And the founder and CEO, Udi Meirav, joining us on the podcast today. So thanks so much again for everyone that was listening. I look forward to speaking with you on our next episode. As always, if you enjoyed it, you can go ahead, drop a review. Please subscribe as well as we continue to highlight founders with impact-driven solutions that are going to help better individuals and society as a whole, as well as our planet. So look forward to speaking with you in our next episode. Thanks for listening to the Talkin Solutions with the Chesh podcast. Tune in every Wednesday for a new episode, and you can find out more about our featured guests and their solutions on our Talkin Solutions podcast Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channels, as we focus on highlighting individuals providing solutions to social problems and bringing optimism to the world.